Mrs. Jones, and the judge, Mr. Keith Evans, are ready to come to you. So under 8 from the Gower area, the first class in the sheep young handlers. Just a reminder to all you young handlers, we've still got the separation between the MB accredited sheep and the non-accredited. So the accredited sheep on the bottom end of the showing area and the non-accredited at the top, please.
I was born in Fairwood Maternity Hospital in March 1962. I arrived somewhat earlier than expected. It's a hard habit to break. I still tend to do it now. For some, the past is a magic, sunshine place. For others, just somewhere to run away from. To me, it's more like an island. Well, almost an island anyway.
Wake before daybreak to catch the low tide. Go fetch my donkey, put sacks on her side. With a basket and rake and a sieve in my hand, I go searching for fish out the sand.
So we've been working on I'm working on the Gower cockle picking basket here because we're about to launch a project, rural skills project, with the Gower Landscape Partnership, and the project is to revive old skills. So one of the baskets that was particularly common on the Gower was the cockle picking basket. The cockle pickers would have made their own baskets, so they would have been very rustic. They would have been out of materials that were to hand. So I looked at what I had in the garden, left over from the winter's harvest, made the frame, and now I'm weaving it with Welsh willow. So this is what they would have done. They would have made their own baskets. We've got rough estimates, but they would have been, every person who wove it would have woven a different basket. They're quite shallow, big baskets, about 24 inches by 12 inches, and it's a style of basket called a frame basket. Each basket is designed fit for its purpose. So it's a large, shallow basket which would have been down on the ground, and they would have scooped the cockles with the sieved out the cockles, and then emptied it into the basket.
Medieval strip fields, give or take, around 1,000 years, 900 years old, since it was kind of in vogue really. And the National Trust owns all the ones that are coloured in, and we've just tenanted them out for the time we've owned them to local farmers, which is fine, and they farm them, which is fine, but actually the wildlife value in them has declined. All the red boundaries have disappeared since 1950, that's just in that block. So we said, we need to put them back in. That's just fields, part of the culture, part of the history is medieval strip fields, and put them back in. And obviously we need to still make this a viable farm. So what we've started to grow is the varieties that you would get in bird feed. Well, it's actually bonkers in a way, because we're going to grow a crop that the birds would quite like in the field, then harvest it and sell it as bird feed.
It sounds bonkers until you take a walk through and then you just see the birds erupting out of the crops. It's just like, yes, this is amazing. We've got huge flocks of linnets coming in. There was up to 500 there the other day when I was there, and all the arable wildflowers that are starting to come back, which are nationally really scarce because the habitat has disappeared over the past 40 years. Things like sharp-beak flea, Llewellyn, weasel snout, parsley pear, these things that most people have never heard of because they were once really common, but now you just don't get them because crops were regularly sprayed, so all the seed bank has sort of disappeared. So it's lovely to start to see some of these pop back up on Gower. Yeah, really exciting.
But the good thing is, because we've got our own combine harvester, we can actually harvest it badly as well. So in a way, we can actually deliberately drop seed on the floor, so feed our own birds, and then feed some in London as well, or wherever it goes, So.
And we're putting more footpaths in, so yeah, I think really encouraging people to get in and have a look and just enjoy the wildlife, and perhaps feel that they've stepped back in time a little bit.
Our family has been at Kimley Moor since 1714. 303 years now then. Rented until 1950 when Penrice Estate sold up. And then my grandfather bought it. As a commoner. Well, Kimley Moor had the original Kimley Moor was 90 acres, and then it had one bullock or one cow to the acre you could graze on the commons, or 5 9 for 5 sheep. Either or, you couldn't do all 400. So we've got what they call stints then per acre, and I've still got my rights to graze on Rossetti Cliffs, Rossetti Hill, and a couple of little commons round here, Pilton Green, Pitton Cross, Coity Green, Hardings Down. So we use them very occasionally, but it isn't often now because people got rights to roam now, and there's dog trouble. We were only down the cliffs last Sunday, and somebody's dog had chased a sheep over the cliff. It's a bit hard on them now, but I think the common rights were sold with farms.
I can't think that you'd want to watch anybody else farm your land.
Yeah, you'd have to either sell it and move from you completely, or
it's in your blood, isn't it?
Yeah, because to be sitting here and knowing that the fields belong to somebody else would be quite heartbreaking for me, really. And then there's pet lambs. I like pet lambs, but Kay doesn't like it because I will do pet lambs because I'm a farmer, and we do our damnedest to, like, I got nearly 300 ewes, and I do try my best to save every lamb, but you can't save them all. So anyway, I wrote this poem called Pet Lambs, and it's the tongue-in-cheek, tongue-in-cheek, not cheap. 10 little orphan lambs separated from their mother. One had enough and went from this world to another. 9 little cute pet lambs all sucking through the gate, which trapped one of its heads in it and brought it down to 8. 8 little cuddly lambs, skipping as if in heaven. One skipped in the water trough, and now I've only 7. 7 little woolly lambs, free from lice and ticks, then Sway back came to visit, and now I've only 6. 6 little growing lambs, very much alive. One had the scours next and brought it down to 5. 5 playful little lambs, eating more and more. One ate too much, blew up, and now I've only 4. 4 lambs let out by day, running oh so free, that a fox spotted one of them, and now I've only 3. 3 bigger, fatter lambs, day by day they grew, too fat, too fast, and pulpy kidney made it 2. 2 very smart young sheep lying in the sun, over on her back goes she, and now I've only 1. I thought I'd keep this pretty ewe to see if she would lamb, but luck was dead against me, she turned out to be a ram.
I probably would be described as being a studio potter, and I have a small pottery here with a wood firing kiln. I suppose the wood firing started very early and was what captivated me. Initially, with firings, there's very different kinds of energy or feeling around a firing. If you fire with gas or oil, you have to have burners, and they make a huge amount of sound, unbearable sound, and you end up backing away from the kiln, so your connection with the firing is kind of much more remote. But once you start to fire with wood, you're very dependent on a lot of different factors. So there's the quality of the wood, there's what kind of wood you use. You use hardwood or softwood, and you're getting part of the glaze in a wood firing is that you're getting what we call the fly ash that comes off the wood, and at a very high temperature it settles on the pots and melts, so you're bringing that directly onto the pots, and so the pots exposed to that wood ash get more glazed by the wood, show the wood firing more than the pots that, say, the other side of the pot that has the back side to the wood. The salt glaze puts onto the pots a kind of very fine glass. So it's the sodium from the salt is making a fine glass on the clay, which is molten because we introduce it at a very high temperature. What I love in Gower is I love that it's kind of contained, that we can reach the north, the west, the south, very readily, and they're all so different. And in a way, I could say that I mean, it's only talking to you now that I think this, my pots are incredibly different on every side. You've got always the side that's most exposed to the weather. You could say that's the salt and the flame and the wood ash. And then you have the side which I call the shadow side of the pot, the side that's more protected. Actually, we call it the protected side. And that always is a little bit more matte and a little quieter. And I think of Gower being all made up of parts that's very exposed and very protected. So I think of us here in a protected place. There's a sort of quietness here, and which is conducive to working and to being. So it's an interesting life because I bring in people from the outside to work here, often from other countries, which I like. So although I'm a bit isolated, I don't feel isolated at all living on this little peninsula. Interesting people come through to work with me and to share my life here, and also interesting people come to the gallery to look at the pots. So I like that.
Okay, the story I remember about Gordon Thomas was he was in the Worm's Head Hotel one night, and a friend of his who was an unemployed bricklayer came in, and they spent the evening gossiping and drinking or whatever. And Gordon said, I've got a piece of walling down, would you care to try and put it back together again? And the builder said, I'll be down tomorrow, lead me to it. So he came down, and it's the most brilliant piece of stone walling you'll ever see on the Russelly Cliffs. And it's on the top of Fall Bay, just before you get to Fall Bay actually, but it's absolutely pristine, and I've tried to do something as good as that, but I can't, no chance.
It looks simple, and it is really quite simple in the fact that all you're doing is stacking stone on stone, where gravity's doing its job. We start off with big strong stones at the base as a foundation, which is a really important part of the wall, and then we build it on a slight batter, which the wall is tapering inward on a 1-in-6 taper. Then it's everything from one side to the other is leaning on each other. A dry stone wall, basically we look at it in like 4 sections really. We'd start with a foundation, get that solid. We have a first lift then, which we come up in a straight line on that taper, working between lines on two tapered frames, up to about a knee height. And at that stage we try and put long stones, which is known as a through stone, straight through a wall where they're available. They're not always available. So that is sort of like tying the whole structure together at that height. Then the second lift then comes up to full height, and it's locked off then with a coping stone which spans the width of the wall at the top to lock everything off. The perfect dry stone wall is the stones that show on the face running inwards to give it the strength. The ideal stones would be if those two stones touch each other. Any gaps that appear you fill with smaller stones, and that's known as the heart of the wall.
You also have to remember Russelly is at the top end of a 4,500 mile trip to the north coast of South America, and the weather will bring in ferocious storms, an enormous amount of rain as well, and salt rain at that. So all the countryside around here is subjected to that sort of horrible sort of weather system.
Once it's built, it's not really mine. It belongs to the trust and the farmer, I guess. Well, it does drive me a bit mad sometimes when you see people coming and testing it, as it were. Well, you see a whole family come past, and often they'll just ignore me and carry on down, and the father explains it all, and the next thing you know, he's rocking the top of the wall backwards and forwards to demonstrate to his family.
was all about the beach when I was a kid. Bucket and spade, sand in your eyes, and that weird taste tomato sandwiches get when they've been in the sun too long. Llangennith Beach. That's me in the middle with David and his sister, down from London on a chapel-sponsored holiday with my auntie and uncle. Bracelet Bay, and my dad sitting there resplendent in his collar and tie.
Well, one of those identifying trees, the ash tree, there's a fungus that grows on an ash tree called a cramp ball. It's black. So I tell this little story about the cramp balls, and it's about a guy called King Alfred. And you might have heard this story, and supposedly it is true. Burst open, it's Kai, the bodyguard. He could just about get through the door. He had to come in sideways. Saw the old lady beating the king. He picks up the old lady like with one hand. "Why, you're beating the king. You will have your head cut off." He was from Port Albert, I think he was. So she said, "The king, what do you mean the king?" The old lady said, "This is the King of England. You're beating the King of England over the head with a big stick. You will have your head cut off." And she begs for forgiveness. But of course, you think about it, she'd never seen the king. She didn't know what a king looked like. There was no telly, no newspapers, none of that stuff. And of course, the king was in his army gear, really. He didn't have his crown or his ermine or his jewels. And the king, being a really nice guy, "Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Head, don't worry, that's okay. Sorry about the cakes, but, that's life, isn't it?" And he's just about to go, and she said, "Just a minute." And she gives the king, she pulls a little bag off the shelf, opens the bag up, pulls out one of these black things, and gives it to the king. But just before she gives it to the king, she breaks it open, and takes a burning ember from the fire, and sets fire to it. And you think, "Oh, it's just going to burst into flame," but it doesn't, it just glows. And gives it to the king, and she says, "Whenever you're really cold and hungry, just light one of these and it'll warm you, and the smell will invigorate you." Right. And off he goes. And that's basically the end of the story. And that's how King Alfred burnt the cakes. And these little black things grow on ash trees. So we say to the kids, when you light the fire, what are you left with? What are you left with after the fire's gone out? Ash.
Loved Wales. I'd been here many, many times, worked and stayed holidays and so forth, and walked around most of the coast of Wales as well, in chunks, big chunks. What I knew about Wales was that it retained much of its cultural identity. So we drove our car and parked it in Caswell Bay and donned our rucksacks, which include tent, food, water, clothes, cooking, everything. Really heavy, you're going to do that, really heavy. So you had to be fit, and younger was helpful too, I would say. And so we walked then along the coast. On our second night, we found a little bay at the end of the big limestone cliff between Porthaenol and Rhossili. And it turns out, and I didn't know at the time because it's not marked on the map, that it was called Fall Bay. And we slept just on the beach there, and luckily we didn't get swamped in the night. It was low tide. And in the morning I got my camera out because it was a beautiful, exquisite morning, and the sun was shining directly into the camera, and it produced shining water, wonderful gradation of colour and light. And I snapped a couple of pictures, and one of them turned out to be one of the best pictures I've ever taken of landscape in a long a long career of taking landscape photographs. Well, it's interesting, you see, as a landscape photographer, I think I've got to know, there's lots of things I have to know, because I have to have a context for my photographs. They're not just pretty pictures. If they were, they'd be empty. But they've got to have a kind of meaning, a sense of telling a story. And if it tells a story, it's got to have I've got to have my input put into it. So I need to know natural history, I need to know geology, I need to know the history of a place, I need to know geological formations, I need to know meteorology, I need to know all sorts of different things.
During World War I and World War II, my grandma recalls going out to the Wormside, because she used to graze the sheep, the Wormside, the sheep. They used to collect seagull eggs during the war. Because of rationing, they used to make cakes and scones there, and they made the best cakes and scones because of the colour of the yolk. But they did taste a bit salty. But I mean, that was a way of means during the war because of rationing. But any seagull's eggs, they used to go climb the rocks and collect, you know, to make omelettes or cakes or stuff like that. So, you know, it was... and if in desperation, they used to kill seagulls to have meat, you know, like pigeons. Yeah.
Some lovely little caves about there, isn't it? They all got these unusual names, haven't they? You can work your way all the way back, and all these old people have called them little names, haven't they? Funny little names, like it's unusual, isn't it, where they come from.
And the cliffs, each cliff top's got a different
yellow
name.
top, that's the
Red
little
chamber.
one just above Red Chamber, the nave, Thurber. Gaboldi is another one, isn't it? Further up before we get to Calverall.
These are the old Gower names,
the old
aren't they?
Gower
The old
names.
Gower people.
The boathouse, we didn't get round to the boathouse, you know, when we went round the Worm, and we decided to go as a little fisherman's cottage there on the side of the cliff. We didn't see that, did we?
No.
You almost came to it.
That's called Kitchen's Corner.
That's
isn't it?
called Kitchen's Corner, but the old people call it Canans.
Reg is the only man born and still living in the same house. So he's born in that house and still lives there. Wow. You know, and that's gone back over 80 years. And it's the only one in the village.
But we're still not Gower. My name is Spencer, see? So it's not a Gower name. But Bevans and name Bynon, as you say, is their Gower names. But I remember I was in Rossilly, and the supervisor said, "You are, here's a Gower man for you now," to this fellow, Bynon. And he said, "What's your name?" "Spencer." "You're not Gower." I said, "Well, I was born there. You're still not Gower," he said.
No. Now, both of my grandparents owned a horse bus. Everybody's got a photograph of those and go over this way anyway. Funnily enough, I had one. And they'd built a shed over it. And I couldn't get it out, tried to break it up to bring it out.
The roads are so narrow that if a bus came up and somebody was walking down, the bus would have to either stop and you had to dash for the gateway. They wouldn't pass.
Well, that was before they widened the road coming into the village.
Or most of the hills coming up into the village, up Cheriton Hill and things like that. The other roads are more or less the same.
Yeah, well, originally they would be just for horses and carts, weren't they?
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have to be wide in those days.
When you think of it,
fantastic.
a horse bus, it seemed to take all day to get to Swansea, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, yeah. Well, my uncle used to drive it in and relied on the horses to bring it out because he used to get drunk. Yes, but apparently, you know, people who went to Swansea basically took their produce into the market to sell. And I think they all had to get out of the bus, any steep hill, they all had to get out of the bus because the horse would pull it up and then they'd walk up and get in the other side. So I was told. It was the same down here, wasn't it? If you were on the beach on a horse and the fog or the mist came down, you wouldn't have to worry about getting back because the horse would bring you back.
Then he said these two horses, the grey and the brown, they were bought and maintained for the good of the town. They do nothing all day but just wander around and go down to the sea for the lifeboat.
Mary Lloyd, Lloyd Mary, a sacred thing through the night they carry. Betrayed are the living, betrayed the dead, all are confused by a horse's head. The wits of a skull are far too great, being out of the hands of the clock. When Mary Lloyd knocks on the door, in charity answer that knock. For white is the frost on the breath-bleared panes, and the star-like fire within, and our Mary is white in her starry reigns, starved through flesh and skin. It is a skull we carry in the ribbons of a bride, bones of the night frost parry, bones of the fire inside. Oh, white is the starlight, white on the gate and white on the bar of the door. Our breath is white in the frost, our fate falls in the dull waves' roar. Oh, rhyme with us now through the keyhole slit, and open the door if you fail. The sea frost, brothers, has spurred our wit, aye, and the killing hail. If we lift and slide the bolt in the door, what can our warm beer buy? What can you give for the food we store, but a slice of starving sky? We are going. The footsteps shrink, and the sea renews her cry. The big stars stare, and the small stars wink. The plough goes glittering by. Mary Lloyd, Lloyd Mary, a sacred thing through the night they carry. Betrayed are the living, betrayed the dead. All are confused by a horse's head.
When you work with glass, it's as if you're working with kind of liquid energy. It's like you're working with the nuances of the way the light flits and changes in every moment. It's, you know, the light outside is never static. So it's a way of capturing the energy, I suppose, of everything. So it's a very, and it's a living material. So glass, although it looks static when you look at a piece of glass, it's actually it's called a supercooled liquid. So the glass itself, its molecules are still bobbing around and moving around, and it's like being in connection with the universe in some ways. And it's sort of born of fire. So it's a lot of really, really exciting things. And although it looks like a cold material, and I work with cold processes, when I mark it, when I'm working with it, I'm putting some of myself into the surface of that particular piece of glass, and I'm kind of pulling gesture out of it. And I got a commission to do community housing in Splot, which was fantastic because it was the first major piece of work that I'd ever done. That was in 1990. So it allowed me to actually go to Germany and to have glass colours made for me, and then to take on a bigger studio, to get my friends to help me, and then to manufacture these big handmade pieces for this building in Splot, where I have to say it was sort of over 60s housing, and they were all slightly expecting to have a sunset or a galleon or something. But no, the steelworks is what I was working with. So I was kind of doing these images of steel on the boil. So they were like these sort of images of furnaces looking in, and then steel being poured and sort of splashes and things. So it was very much not to what anybody was expecting. One of the most important things about being an artist is to have your own identity, and I think that my whole sort of expression has always been rooted in the place that I'm from. It's always, even when I lived in the city and overlooked, looking over the sea, my references have always been either where I grew up in Pembrokeshire, so very sort of rugged landscape, or here on Gower, which is, I think it's maybe partly to do with walking. I don't know about you, but when I am thinking about a commission, I will always go for a long walk. And if I don't know what to do, if I've got reached a point in the studio where I'm not quite sure where to go with a piece of work, I'll stop, put my tools down and go for a walk. And there's something about that connection with your surroundings, and I think a certain energy in where you live, actually, that is, it's not a conscious thing. I think it's something that's much more baseline or subliminal than that. It's a kind of energy of the place that is sort of the way you make a mark. It's there. It's what is imprinted on your brain. You know, when you close your eyes and you think of a landscape, it's likely to be, I don't know, Pwllheli, or I don't know, Worm's Head or Muslade Bay, or the way that the rocks are laid down, or the things that, you know, the way the sea hits the shore, or I don't know, the way the grasses blow in the sand dunes. That these are not they're not sort of literal images, but they're a way that you know, if you, I like to sort of I keep that in the back of my mind. And if I'm working in a big kiln, for instance, and I'm doing a big cast piece of glass, I'll sort of take myself to the beach, and then I'll make gestures that remind me of that place. So it's just something that if you weren't rooted in a place, I'm not sure that you'd be able to access that.
Gower, full of my family's favourite places, where my parents chose to be remembered. The place I first got sunburnt, and where I had my first kiss. Alive with adventure. Almost an island.
Yeah, because we're talking about Phil Tanner now, aren't we? Yes, you must have heard of Phil Tanner.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, everybody's heard of Phil Tanner. Have you ever heard his music? I thought it was terrible. Because they played it once, you must listen to Phil Tanner. Oh, well, okay, I've heard so much about this Phil Tanner. Well, hell, I've never heard such a noise in all my life. It was dreadful. No. Oh.
But he liked it.
Yeah, well, he would, wouldn't he? Because he's probably the only man who ever sang in Gower. Oh.